The scent of roasting boar and wood smoke was thick enough to taste. A hazy veil over the great timbered hall of the Stone Spine clan. Elara moved through the press of bodies, an earthenware pitcher of honeyed mead heavy in her hands. She was a flicker of plain wool and tired motion in a sea of leather and primal energy. Keep your head down, serve the wine, smile. The mantra was a worn rhythm in her mind, as familiar as the ache in her feet. For 3 years since the fever took her parents and left her with a younger brother to raise, this had been her life. An outsider tolerated for her usefulness, a human woman in a fortress of wolfkin. She was setting a cup before a hulking warrior when the air in the hall changed. It wasn't a sound but a stillness, the room taking one sharp breath. She turned. He stood in the arched entranceway, a silhouette against the dying sun. Alaric, alpha of the Stone Spine. He had been away for a fortnight, hunting or warring. The two were often the same. He was not a large man, not compared to some of his warriors, but he carried a density of presence that made the very air cling to him. He smelled of cold mountain air and lightning-scorched stone, a scent that cut through the hall's feast warmth. His gaze, pale ice blue and glowing with a faint feral light, swept the room. It was the gaze of a predator taking inventory of his territory. It passed over chieftains and elders, over the she-wolf Morwen, who watched him with a possessive heat. And then, for a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, it snagged on Elara. Her breath hitched. It always did. It was the instinctual fear of a rabbit sighting a wolf. She quickly looked down, her heart hammering against her ribs. Invisible. Be invisible. She finished serving and turned back toward the ale kegs, the press of the crowd pushing her close to the high table where Alaric now stood, speaking in low tones with his beta. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It was then she heard it. A phrase, spoken in the old tongue, the sacred guttural language of the wolfkin. A language her grandmother, a human seer who had loved a wolfkin once, had taught her in whispers. Thrallr fen min skugga, Alaric murmured to his beta. The prey fears my shadow. It was not meant for her. It was a casual remark between packmates, but the response from his beta, a grin on his face, was in the same tongue. The pack eats because of it, my alpha. Any smart person would have kept walking. But Elara was tired of being unseen, tired of the constant hunger in her brother Leaf's eyes, tired of the weight of a world that demanded her silence. A spark of that old, foolish pride, inherited from a grandmother who dared to love a monster, flared within her. As she passed, her eyes fixed ahead, the words left her lips in a whisper, a perfect, sharp-edged echo of the old tongue. But the shadow cannot fill the belly. The space around Alaric went utterly still. She felt the shift in the atmosphere before she saw it. The gravity in the room bent toward him. She dared a glance back. Alaric was no longer looking at his beta. He was looking directly at her, his head tilted in a gesture that was entirely wolf. His gaze tightened, the feral glow intensifying. There was no anger on his face, only a deep, unsettling curiosity. And that was far, far worse. Morwen, the dominant she-wolf whose ambitions were no secret, took a step forward, her elegant nostrils flaring. "What did the thrall say?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the sudden quiet. Elara's feet were roots sunk deep into the earth. She could not move. Alaric's voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. He used the common tongue now. She brought a thought. His gaze never left Elara. A sharp one. One of the visiting warriors from the rival Stonescar clan, a brute with a scar bisecting his brow, slammed his cup down. "You bring your pack politics to a shared feast, Alaric, under the truce of the full moon?" "I brought my presence," Alaric said, his tone dangerously flat. "She brought the wit." "She brought your tongue into her mouth," Scarbrow snarled, rising to his feet. "Funny how we've been trying to get a measure of you, Stone Spine, and now this human speaks words only your inner circle should know." Elara found her voice, thin and reedy. I meant no." Alaric stood. The motion was fluid and final, a sword being drawn. "She didn't know. Let it lie. It cannot lie." Scarbrow's companion, a younger wolf with a cruel twist to his mouth, cracked his knuckles. Our chieftain, Boren, hears you're flaunting your secrets in front of humans. He'll think you've gone soft. We'll have to clarify the situation." He looked directly at Elara. The threat was a physical chill down her spine. She knew what clarify meant. An interrogation in a dark corner of the fortress. A body found broken at the foot of the cliffs. The hall's chieftain, an old wolf named Griff, moved to intervene. "Not in my hall. You have a grievance. Take it to the proving grounds." "We have the girl," Scarbrow said, his eyes gleaming. "A few questions, that's all." Elara stumbled back a step, her hip connecting painfully with the edge of a trestle table. The pitcher slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the stone floor. Alaric moved. It was not a movement of steps, but of consequence. One moment he was behind the high table, the next he was between Elara and the Scarbrow, his hand locked around the larger man's wrist. There was a sickening pop of tendons straining. The Scarbrow grunted, his knees buckling. The younger one lunged, and Alaric used the first man as a weapon, swinging his body in a short, brutal arc. They crashed into a lower table, sending splinters, meat, and ale flying. The hall erupted into snarls and shouting. Elara should have run, to the kitchens, to the women's quarters, to find Leaf, but her feet were still rooted. As the younger warrior shoved past Alaric, his eyes wild with battle lust, she acted on pure instinct. She grabbed a heavy iron ladle from a serving stand and swung it with all her strength into his reaching hand. The crack of bone was sickeningly loud. The man howled, recoiling. Alaric was on him in an instant, spinning him and slamming his face into the stone edge of the hearth. Not to kill, to incapacitate. He turned, his chest heaving, eyes blazing now with a full, terrifying lupine light. They found her. "Kitchen," he commanded, his voice a guttural rasp. "Now?" This time, she moved. He was at her side in 2 strides, his hand closing around her upper arm. His touch was like branding iron, searing through the thin wool of her sleeve. He pulled her through the chaos, kicked open the heavy door to the kitchens, and shoved her through. He jammed a stout stirring paddle through the iron handles, barring it just as a heavy body thudded against the other side. He turned to her. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the embers of the great cooking fire. His presence filled the space, raw and overwhelming. "The postern gate," he said, his breath a white plume in the sudden chill. She pointed a trembling hand toward the rear of the kitchens. The barred door shuddered under another impact. Voices roared from the hall. Alaric's gaze swept over her, the heaving chest, the white-knuckled grip on the iron ladle, the sheer, stubborn defiance still burning in her eyes, despite her fear. "Can you run in those?" He nodded at her worn leather shoes. "I can survive," she whispered, the words a vow. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, but a flicker of dark approval. "Good. Stay at my heel. When I say move, you move. Understand?" The door splintered. The paddle groaned, about to snap. She dropped the ladle, it clattered on the stone floor. He didn't offer his hand. He simply turned, a shadow waiting for her. Elara took a breath. From the kitchen came a faint kettle hiss and the soft clink of metal, and she followed him into the dark. They burst from the postern gate into a narrow, mist-choked alley between the fortress's outer wall and the sheer cliff face. The world was reduced to whetstone, the distant roar of the sea below, and gulls creaking in the fog. Alaric pulled her right, then immediately left, into a crevice hidden by a fall of ivy, a forgotten watch niche, barely large enough for one, let alone 2. He pressed her back against the cold, damp stone, his body a solid, living wall between her and the world. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace against the night's chill. His chest rose and fell in a controlled rhythm, but she could hear the raw power in each breath, feel the faint vibration where her own body nearly touched his. Her heart was a wild bird beating against its cage. She was trapped between unyielding stone and untamed male, and her senses were drowning in him. The scent of deep earth and wild musk, the hard line of his shoulder under her cheek as he leaned to listen, the sheer, terrifying stillness of a predator holding its ground. He was listening, his head tilted, every fiber of his being attuned to the hunt. But Elara was attuned only to him. to the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, to the pulse beating at the base of his throat, to the way his hands, braced on the stone on either side of her, were curled into loose fists, the knuckles a roadmap of old violence. When did you learn the old tongue? His voice was the barest murmur, a vibration in the hollow of her throat. My grandmother, she breathed, the words trembling. She was a seer. She loved one of your kind. She taught me. His head turned slightly. In the deep gloom, his eyes held their own light, 2 shards of pale moonstone fixed on her. And the words you chose? The shadow cannot fill the belly? It was foolish. I spoke without thought. No. The word was soft but absolute. You spoke a truth. A pack that relies on fear alone starves its soul. He studied her, and she felt laid bare, every secret thought and desperate hope exposed. Why say it to me? Because you looked at everyone, and you saw no one. The confession was torn from her, fueled by adrenaline and a strange burgeoning courage. I am tired of being no one. His gaze dropped. For a fleeting incendiary moment, it rested on her lips. Then it snapped back to hers, and the intensity there made her gasp. You should have held your tongue, he said, his voice roughening, taking on a gravelly edge that was more wolf than man. In the hall, you should have bent your head and been silent. I do not bend, Elara whispered, her chin lifting despite the fear. Not for any man, not even an alpha. Something hot and bright flared in his eyes. Approval, possession, desire. It was all there, a storm contained behind a wall of will. I see that, he growled. You are not invisible, Elara. That is your curse. The way he said her name, low, deliberate, as if tasting its shape, sent a jolt of pure lightning through her veins. Footsteps crunched on gravel, close. Voices grunted in the stone scar dialect. Check the cliffsides. In a movement too fast for her eyes to follow, Alaric's hand came up and covered her mouth. His palm was calloused, warm, and smelled of leather and the night. It was not a brutal gesture, but one of stark necessity. A silent command for stillness. Their eyes locked. She could feel the hard planes of his body, the coiled strength held in check by a thread. She could see the wildness in him, the beast that lay just beneath the skin. And for a terrifying, thrilling moment, she was not afraid of it. She was mesmerized. The footsteps passed. The voices faded into the mist. Slowly, deliberately, Alaric lowered his hand. His thumb brushed the line of her jaw, a touch so fleeting she might have imagined it, yet it burned like a brand. He pushed back from the stone, putting a precious inch of cold, damp air between them. The loss of his heat was a shock. We need to move, he said. His voice was steady, but the wolf light still burned in his eyes, and a muscle ticked in his jaw. I know. The words were breathless. He stilled, his gaze sharpening. Do you? Do you know what you stepped into back there? I know I corrected an alpha and started a war. You didn't start it. You lit the fuse on a war that was already brewing. He shifted, a shadow ready for motion. The Stone Scar clan seeks to control the sacred hunting grounds in the Shadowed Vale. They believe my pack is weak. You, a human, speaking the old tongue with such impunity, confirm their suspicion that my control is slipping. Her stomach clenched. So what happens to me now? Do I become a casualty of this war? They will see you as a key, he said, his tone grim. Either a tool to use against me or a weakness to exploit. They will come for you. They will use your brother. Leif. The name was a prayer, a stab of pure terror. No. Yes. There was no cruelty in the word, only a brutal honesty that was somehow worse. But I can shield you, if you consent. Consent to what? She asked, her voice trembling. To my protection, for 2 nights. There is a stone keep high in the mountains, a place of the old magic. We go there now. At the moon's zenith, the clans will parley. I need you there. I need your ears. You understand the nuances of the old tongue, the lies hidden within the formal words. You need a translator. I need you. His gaze was unwavering. You, who are brave enough to tell an alpha his shadow is empty. No one else. Her mind raced. Her brother, safe in the apprentice's dormitory. Her place in the fortress, tenuous at best. The cold, certain truth in Alaric's eyes. And if I agree? Leaf is safe? My position is secure? Your brother will be under my personal guard. Your place? He paused, his eyes roaming her face again, leaving fire in their wake. Your place will be whatever you wish it to be. I am not a good man, Elara. My methods are written in the scars of my enemies, but my word, once given, is stone. It does not break. From the direction of the fortress, a lone howl pierced the night. It was not a cry of triumph, but of pursuit. Alaric extended his hand, not to pull her, but to offer. His palm was upturned, the scars a testament to his promise. The hunt is on, he said, his voice low and final. Yes or no? Elara looked at his hand, the hand of a killer, the hand of a king, the hand that had, moments ago, touched her with a shocking, possessive gentleness. She thought of Leaf's future, she thought of a life of servitude and fear, and she thought of the wild, terrifying light in Alaric's eyes when he looked at her, a light that promised not safety, but a different kind of life entirely. She placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, and absolute. Yes, she said. 2 nights. A low rumble sounded in his chest, almost a purr. It was the sound of satisfaction, of claim. He pulled her from the niche, and together they vanished into the shadowed woods, the mist swallowing them whole. Elara did not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the ghost of Alaric's touch, the heat of his hand on her waist, the possessive weight of his arm around her as they'd slept in the stone keep, the low rumble in his chest when he'd pulled her close, the look in his eyes, fierce and feral, when he'd said, "You are mine to shield. We finish this. Then you decide." The words were a torment, a promise of a choice that felt both inevitable and impossible. By the time the first gray light of dawn bled through the narrow window of the mountain keep, she had given up. She rose, washing in the basin of cold water, the scent of pine and male that clung to the spare room a constant reminder of him. Her own clothes, a simple, sturdy tunic and trousers, worn soft from years of use, had been cleaned and laid out for her. He had seen to it, a small, infuriating act of care from the man who had upended her life. She found him in the main chamber of the keep, a Spartan room dominated by a great hearth. He stood before the cold ashes, a map of the shadowed vale spread on a heavy oak table. He was already clad in his warrior's leathers, a pelt of a great gray wolf thrown over one shoulder. The sight of him, so utterly in his element, sent a treacherous thrill through her. He looked up as she entered. His gaze, usually lit with contained ferocity, was shadowed. The connection between them, that strange, humming thread she had felt since the great hall, was taut with a new, painful tension. "The parley is at high sun," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp that spoke of his own sleepless night. "Held at the Standing Stones, a place of old magic, neutral ground." He gestured to the map. "Before that, we will go there. I need you to feel the space, understand the sightlines, know where you will be." "Is it safe?" she asked, her voice cooler than she intended. "The stones are sacred. A truce sworn there is binding, enforced by the elders and the old gods themselves." His jaw tightened. "But we will be armed, regardless." They left the keep as the sun crested the mountains, the world painted in shades of gold and deep blue shadow. Alaric moved with a predator's grace, his senses attuned to every rustle of leaf, every distant bird call. He positioned himself always between her and the unseen, his body a living shield. She watched the flecks of muscle in his back, the way the morning light caught the silver streaks in his dark hair, and felt her heart clench with a confusing mix of betrayal and desire. "You watch me as a hunter watches prey," he said, without turning, his voice cutting through the forest silence. "I watch you as a woman watches a storm," Elara countered, her chin lifting, with respect for its power and fear of the damage it will leave in its wake. He stopped then, turning to face her. The look he gave her was raw, stripped of its alpha's composure. "Elara, we have a parley to prepare for," she said, sidestepping the unspoken words between them. "Show me these stones." The Standing Stones were ancient, monoliths of weathered granite that thrust from the earth like the broken teeth of a forgotten giant. The air hummed with a low, resonant power that raised the fine hairs on Elara's arms. Mist clung to the base of the stones, though the sun was bright overhead. Alaric led her through the circle. The elders will stand here, he pointed to the center. My pack, here, the stone scar, there. You will be here. He guided her to a low, flat rock nestled between two taller stones. Close enough to hear every whispered word, hidden from direct view. You are my shadow, my secret weapon. She sat on the rock, testing the position. She could see the entire clearing, could hear the way sound echoed strangely between the monoliths. I can hear the lies here, she murmured, surprised. The stones, they seem to steal the truth from a voice. That is their magic, Alaric said, his voice low. He came to stand before her, so close she had to tilt her head back to see his face, the pale sky a halo behind him. When they speak in the old tongue, I need you to catch the meaning beneath the meaning. The threats wrapped in formal phrases, the alliances hinted at in a single word. Like in the Great Hall. Exactly like the Great Hall. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a brand that seared through her resolve. You have a gift, Elara. You see the patterns others miss. I am terrified, she confessed. The words torn from her, of the parley, of the stone scar, of what happens after. After, the word was a low rumble, when I have to decide. She stood, and they were inches apart, the charged air between them crackling. You asked me to choose with a clear head. But how can my head be clear when I can still feel the weight of your arm around me? When I look at you and remember the sound you made when you held me close. His breath hitched, a wolfish sound. Elara, I am not asking you to break your vow. I am not asking you to claim me before this is done. She held his glowing gaze, her own blazing with a courage she did not feel. But you must know, the decision is taking shape inside me, and you should prepare for its form. The air stilled. The very forest seemed to hold its breath. What form? His voice was a dangerous growl. That I want this, want you, even though you are a killer, even though your world is made of stone and blood, even though every instinct of self-preservation screams for me to run back to the world of men. He moved then, a blur of controlled power, backing her against the cold, rough surface of a standing stone. His hands braced on either side of her head, his body a line of heat she ached to lean into. You are unmanning me, he breathed, his forehead nearly touching hers. I am trying to be honorable, to give you a choice free of the heat of battle, and you stand here telling me that I choose you. Her hand found the hard plane of his chest, felt the frantic, powerful beat of his heart. I am telling you that when the sun sets on this parley, when the threat is ended and I am safe, I will choose you. So be ready. He squeezed his eyes shut, a tremor running through his powerful frame. You do not know what you are asking for. I know exactly. I see you, Alaric. The scars, the weight of command, the man trying to be more than the beast. When you hold me, I feel whole. Her fingers curled into the leather of his tunic. I trust you with my life, and I am beginning to trust you with what remains of my heart. His forehead dropped to hers. They stood like that, not kissing, not claiming, simply sharing breath in the sacred space, the tension a living entity between them. The parley, he whispered, the word a vow. We face it, together. Together, she agreed. And after, she said, her voice firm with a certainty that shook her to her core. You will be mine, if you wish to be. A rough, breathless sound escaped him, half growl, half laugh. If I wish to be, by the gods, woman. I have wished for nothing else since you looked at me in that hall and refused to bend, since you struck one of my enemies with an iron ladle and stood your ground. You are more than your shadows, Alaric. I am trying to be. He pulled back, his gaze searching her face. But you must understand this life, what I am, it is not safe. It is not kind. People I care for can be used against me. I cannot promise you a life without danger. I am not asking for promises. I am asking for honesty, for you to be the man who will not claim me until I am free to choose. The alpha who takes a rival's challenge to protect a human woman. The wolf who looks at me as if I were the other half of my soul. He said it not as poetry, but as a stark, terrifying fact. For you are becoming so. The confession hung between them, more binding than any vow sworn on the stones. A howl echoed in the distance, long, mournful, a signal. Alaric's head snapped up. The moment shattered. My scout, the stone scar, are on the move. Reality, cold and sharp, returned. They had a war to avert. We should go, Elara said. Yes. But he did not move, his gaze burning her image into his memory. Elara, after the parley, I will do this properly. I will court you under the sun and stars. I will bring you gifts of amber and polished stone, not in a mountain keep or a sacred circle, or while fleeing for our lives. A warmth, fierce and bright, bloomed in her chest. You are proposing a courtship? I am stating my intention. The corner of his mouth lifted in the ghost of a smile. You deserve that. You deserve songs and sunlight. She kissed him. It was not gentle. It was acclaiming. She rose on her toes, fisted her hands in the wolf pelt at his shoulders, and crushed her mouth to his. It was a clash of heat and desperation, a taste of the wildness in him, a promise of everything to come. When she pulled back, his eyes were molten gold, the wolf blazing within. That is a yes, she breathed, to the courtship, to the sunlight, to whatever comes after. Noted. His voice was a growl of pure need. Now we must go, before I forget every oath of honor and take you here, on this sacred ground, and make you mine in truth. They left the circle. The sun was higher now, the mist burning away. As they walked back toward the keep, a new understanding settled between them, solid and sure. They were a pair, a unit. Whatever came at high sun, they would face it together. And after, she would let the wildness in her heart run free. The journey back to the stone-spine fortress was a silent, tense affair. Alaric's warriors formed a protective ring around them, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Upon their return, Alaric led her to the armory, a cavernous room smelling of oiled metal and sweat. He strapped a slender, sharp dagger to her thigh himself, his touch clinical yet intimate through the fabric of her trousers. Do not hesitate to use it, he said, his eyes deadly serious. Aim for the throat or the eye. It will not kill a wolfkin, but it will give you time to run. The reality of what was to come settled over her like a shroud. The parley was to be held in the fortress's great yard. The Stone Scar clan arrived at high sun, their chieftain, Boren, a mountain of a man with a beard woven with iron rings and eyes like chips of flint. His gaze swept over Alaric's forces and landed, with unsettling precision, on Elara, where she stood slightly behind Alaric, partially obscured by Morwen's formidable presence. The air crackled with hostility as the formal words were spoken, the grievances laid bare. The Stone Scar demanded hunting rights in the shadowed vale. Alaric refused, his voice like grinding stone. They spoke in the common tongue, for the benefit of the neutral elders who stood between them. Then Boren shifted, his voice dropping into the guttural rhythms of the old tongue. Your pack grows soft, Stonespine. You shelter a human pet who plays with words she does not understand. Is this the strength you offer these lands? Elara's breath caught. She focused, her grandmother's lessons echoing in her mind. She leaned slightly toward Alaric. He is not just insulting you, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. He is probing. He says pet, but the inflection implies spy. He is testing to see if I truly understand, and if you are weak for keeping me close. Alaric did not look at her, but his posture shifted, becoming even more rigidly controlled. My strength is not measured by the company I keep, but by the blood of my enemies that waters this earth, Alaric replied in the same tongue, his voice a low thunder. The veil is mine by right of challenge and blood. You will not set foot in it. The parley continued, a deadly dance of words and posturing. Elara translated the subtle threats, the hidden meanings, the lies woven into formal speech. She was the needle threading the truth through the fabric of their deception. Alaric, armed with her insights, parried every verbal thrust, his responses sharp and unyielding. It was working. Boren's frustration was beginning to show, his snarls becoming less controlled. Then Boren's Beta, the warrior with the scarred brow, spoke, his eyes locked on Elara with a venomous glee. The human is not just a speaker of tongues, is she, Alaric? We have heard tales of a human woman, 6 moons past, who worked the herb gardens near the Whispering Falls, the same gardens where our scouts were ambushed. She was seen noting the comings and goings of our people, gathering intelligence. The world tilted. Elara's blood ran cold. She had taken that work, a few days' labor for a traveling herbalist, to earn enough silver to buy Leaf a new winter cloak. The herbalist had been friendly, the work simple. She had paid no mind to the wolfkin who passed in the distance. She had been used, unknowingly, innocently, and Alaric had known. She looked at him, saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible flicker of his eyes toward her. He had known. He had known the stone scar had this piece to play, and he had not warned her. Boren grinned, a predator sensing blood. So, the human is not your interpreter. She is your spy, a human you planted in our territory to scout for you. This parley is a sham. You have already broken the peace. The accusation hung in the air, a poison that threatened to unravel everything. Alaric's voice cut through the tension, cold and absolute. She is under my protection. Any claim against her is a claim against me. You have no proof, only conjecture spun from coincidence. But Elara was no longer listening. The truth was a shard of ice in her heart. She had been a pawn from the very beginning, not just bait to confirm a leak, but an unwitting asset in a territorial war. And Alaric, knowing the danger she was in, had drawn her deeper into his world to control the fallout. The parley dissolved into shouted threats and posturing, the truce fracturing. The stone scar withdrew, but the damage was done. Back inside the fortress, the moment they were alone in a secluded antechamber, Elara turned on him. The dagger felt heavy on her thigh. "You knew," she said, her voice trembling with a fury born of betrayal. "You knew about the herbalist. You knew they could connect me to it." Alaric's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were turbulent. "I knew. I discovered it when I had my warriors investigate you after the incident in the hall. And you did not think to tell me. You let me stand there, believing I was making a choice, when the entire time I was a piece on your board, a vulnerability you were managing. I was protecting you," the words were a snarl, his control fraying. "By keeping you close, by making you essential to my strategy, I could justify your presence. I could shield you from their direct retaliation. By making me the center of the storm, you marked me, Alaric. You used that insult in the hall not just to find a leak, but to make sure the stone scars saw me as yours. You made me a target to draw their fire." "Yes," he roared, the sound echoing in the small room. He advanced on her, his presence overwhelming. "Yes, I used the insult to mark you, because I knew once they were focused on you, I could control the narrative. I could keep you where I could see you, where I could protect you, where I needed you to be to win this. So I was a tool? A strategic distraction. You were never just a tool." He stopped, his chest heaving. "You were gods, Elara. You were a complication I could not afford, and a desire I could not deny. From the moment I saw you, I knew you would be my undoing. But you calculated the risk anyway. You decided my safety was an acceptable price for your victory. I decided you were worth any price." His voice dropped to a raw, desperate whisper. "Including the price of my own honor. I knew I could keep you safe. I knew I would tear this world apart to do it. Every step was a calculation to keep you alive and with me. Alive and under your control." She took a step back, her hand going to the hilt of the dagger. "You spoke of honor, of giving me a choice. It was a lie. The choice was never mine. You engineered it all. Elara, please, no." The word was final, cold as the mountain stone. "I will play my part. I will see this through, because Leaf's safety and the fate of this pack depend on it. But after, we are done. No courtship, no sunlight, no us." "You cannot mean that." He reached for her, his expression one of true, unvarnished anguish. She drew the dagger, not pointing it at him, but holding it between them, a symbol of the breach. "Do not touch me. You let me believe what was between us was real. when it was built on a foundation of secrets and strategy. He stared at the blade, then at her face, and for the first time, the mighty Alpha, the formidable warlord, had no words. He was utterly defeated. That is what I thought. She sheathed the dagger, her heart shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the shadows. Elara? His voice was broken. She did not look back. You hurt me, she whispered to the empty corridor ahead. You built a fortress of lies around me and called it protection. And she left, the bond between them stretching to its breaking point, a silent, agonizing scream in the space where their hearts had begun to beat as one. Elara lasted 4 hours in the women's quarters before the weight of her promise became a physical ache. It was not guilt over leaving Alaric. He had carved that chasm with his own hands. It was the debt she owed to the pack, to the people whose lives and safety hinged on the outcome of the parley, to Leaf, whose future in this fortress depended on its strength. She had given her word, and her word, unlike some, was stone. By the dim light of a single tallow candle, she pulled out the scraps of vellum and charcoal sticks she had used to make her notes. She studied the patterns of the stone scar warriors, the subtle hand gestures, the specific postures, the cadence of their speech in the old tongue, and she saw what she had missed before. The signals were not just commands. They were a language. A quick, sharp flick of the fingers meant flank left when given during a tense silence, but meant hold position when accompanied by a low growl. The angle of a warrior's head when a signal was given changed its meaning entirely. They were speaking a fluid, silent dialect of war, and if she could decipher its full grammar, she could give Alaric more than translation. She could give him prophecy. She found a young pack runner in the hall, his eyes wide at being addressed by the human who had faced down the Alpha and the Stone Scar in one day. Take a message to your Alpha, she said, her voice firm. Tell him the signals are a full language. Their silent war speak. I am deciphering it now. The boy nodded and darted off. The response came not in words, but in action. A short while later, a warm pelt, a horn of honeyed mead, and a platter of roasted meat and dark bread appeared at her door. No note, no apology. A warrior's offering, an Alpha's care. It was a language she was beginning to understand all too well. She did not sleep. She worked until her eyes burned, and the dawn's first light turned the mountain peaks to fire. The final parley was held at high sun, not in the sacred circle, but in the great yard of the stone-spined fortress, under the watchful eyes of the entire pack and the neutral elders. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, cold iron, and simmering aggression. Elara took her place not as a hidden shadow, but standing just behind Alaric's left shoulder. A statement. Morwen, on his right, shot her a look of pure venom, but said nothing. Her position had been challenged, and for now, seated. Alaric was clad in full battle regalia, the pelt of the great gray wolf across his shoulders, his chestplate of hardened leather and bronze gleaming dully. He did not look at her, but she felt his awareness of her like a physical touch. The Stone Scar arrived, their chieftain Boren leading them, his face a mask of grim fury. The formal grievances were recited, the demands restated. Boren wanted the shadowed veil, and he wanted the human spy handed over as a token of good faith. Alaric's refusal was a low growl that vibrated through the stones under their feet. The veil is mine. The woman is under my protection. You will have neither. The posturing began again, a dance of threats and boasts, but underneath the silent language flowed. Boren gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His beta, Scarbrow, shifted his weight. Ready. A warrior near the back scratched his jaw with 2 fingers, archers in position. Elara's heart hammered. She leaned forward, her voice a bare whisper only Alaric could hear. He just signaled his archers. They are in the high rocks to the east. He is not here to talk. He is here to fight. Alaric's posture did not change, but the air around him grew colder. Elders, he said, his voice cutting through Boren's next threat. The Stone Scar come to this parley with hidden blades. Their archers are positioned in the crags, aiming at this yard. Is this the act of a clan seeking peace? Boren's eyes widened in shock, then fury. He had been exposed. Lies. Is it? Alaric's gaze was lethal. "Shall I have my scouts retrieve their bodies for you to identify?" The elders stirred, their faces darkening. The sanctity of the parley had been broken. "The human whispers poison in your ear," Boren roared, pointing a thick finger at Elara. "She is the spy. She tended the herb gardens near the Whispering Falls, where my son was ambushed. She is the reason he lies abed, bleeding out his life. The accusation, true in its facts and false in its intent, landed like a hammer blow." Elara felt the pack's attention shift to her, a wave of suspicion and anger. But Alaric did not flinch. "She is under my protection," he repeated, each word a chip of ice. "Any claim against her is a claim against me. You have no proof, only the desperate lies of a chieftain who has lost his honor." The tension snapped. Boren snarled, a truly inhuman sound, and his hand went to the axe at his belt. It was then Elara stepped out from behind Alaric. She did not look at him for permission. She walked into the space between the two alphas, her head high, her heart a wild drum in her chest. "I was there," she declared, her voice clear and carrying. "I worked the gardens for 3 days for a traveling herbalist, to buy a warm cloak for my brother before the snows came. I saw your son. He passed by with his hunters. I thought nothing of it." She turned to the elders. "But Chieftain Boren is right about one thing. I was used. My presence there was noted, and my innocence was twisted into a weapon by a chieftain who seeks any excuse for a war he has already planned." She turned her back on Boren, a breathtaking act of defiance, and faced Alaric and the elders. "And I can prove it. They speak a silent language. Even now they coordinate their attack. A nod from Boren means hold. A shift of the beta's weight means ready. A 2-fingered scratch means archers. They have been telling each other how to kill you while their chieftain speaks of peace." Boren let out a roar of pure rage. "You dare!" "I dare!" Elara shouted back, turning to face him, all her fear burned away in the fire of her truth. "I dare because I am tired of being a piece in a game played by wolves. I am not your spy. I am not his pawn. I am Elara, and I see you. I see your lies, and I will not be silent for them." For a moment there was only the sound of the wind and the ragged breaths of 200 wolfkin. Then Alaric spoke, his voice the calm at the eye of the storm. "The parley is ended. The Stone Scar have violated the sacred truce. By the old laws, your claim is forfeit. Leave my lands. Now." Boren stood, quivering with fury. His eyes, burning with hatred, swept from Alaric to Elara. "This is not over, Stonespine. You shelter a human who sees too much. That is a weakness I will exploit." "She is not my weakness," Alaric said, and his voice dropped into a register so low and deadly it silenced the very air. "She is my strength, and if you so much as look in her direction again, I will not challenge you for the veil. I will come for your throne, I will come for your pack, and I will tear your entire world down to the stone until the only thing that remains of the Stone Scar is the echo of your failure." The threat was absolute. It was not the bluster of a warrior, but the cold, certain promise of a king. Boren held his gaze for a long, terrible moment. Then he spat on the ground, turned, and led his warriors from the yard. The threat of violence receded with them, leaving a trembling silence in its wake. It was over. Elara did not wait for the praise or the questions. She walked away from the gathered pack, her legs shaking, and found a quiet alcove overlooking the mountains. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone, trying to still the tremors that racked her body. She felt him before she heard him. His presence was a change in the air, a warmth at her back. "That was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed," Alaric said, his voice rough with emotion. She did not turn. Do not compliment me as if it erases what you did. I am not." He moved to stand beside her, not touching, his gaze on the same distant peaks. "I am stating a fact. You stood between 2 warring alphas and spoke a truth that shattered his strategy and saved lives. My life, among others. You broke my trust. I know. You saw me as a piece to be moved. I know." He turned to her then, and the raw anguish on his face was a shock. "And I will carry the shame of that until my last breath. I cannot undo it. I can only offer you the man I am now. The man who would tear down the world for you, but who would first ask if you wished it torn. Her breath hitched. How can I believe that? You cannot. Not yet. He took a careful step closer. But I'm asking you to let me earn it. Let me prove that I can be the wolf who runs at your side, not the alpha who commands you. The man who sees Elara, whose courage humbles him, whose fire warms him, and whose trust is the only territory I now wish to claim. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and insistent. Alaric, I love you. The words were not a plea, but a vow, spoken to the mountains themselves. I think I have since you looked at me in the great hall and refused to be afraid, since you stood your ground with a ladle and a lion's heart. You are my fated mate, Elara, the song in my blood, and I am asking, begging, for a chance to be worthy of that song. The confession, woven with the lore of his people, shattered the last of her defenses. She saw the truth of it in his eyes, in the bond that had hummed between them from the start. A primal pull that transcended his mistakes and her fear. I cannot promise I forgive you, she whispered, the tears finally falling. Not yet. His face fell, but he nodded, accepting the blow. But, she continued, her voice strengthening, I am willing to let you try to earn it. Hope, fierce and bright, reignited in his gaze. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear. His touch was a brand, a promise, a beginning. On my life, he whispered. On my honor, I will. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of conquest, but of surrender, of homecoming. It was the taste of cold mountain air and deep earth, of vulnerability and absolute certainty. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in the wolf pelt at his shoulders, pouring all her hurt, her hope, and her hard-won trust into the connection. When they broke apart, the world had shifted on its axis. A courtship, he said, his forehead resting against hers, under the sun and stars, as I promised. Yes. And then a lifetime, he breathed, if you will have me. Ask me again, she murmured, her heart full to breaking. After you have rebuilt my trust, after you have proven yourself, ask me then. I will. He kissed her again, softly, reverently. Every sunrise until you say yes. They stood together as the sun began its descent, the shadow of the fortress stretching over the land below. The war was over, a new world was beginning. It was not a happy ending. It was a hunt just started. 3 moons later. The snows had come to the mountains, laying a thick, silent blanket over the Stone Spine territory. The Stone Scar, humiliated and outmaneuvered, had withdrawn to lick their wounds. Boren's challenge had broken him. His own pack had begun to question his leadership. Within the fortress, a new peace had taken root. Leif had been formally accepted as a ward of the pack, his quick mind and cheerful nature winning over even the most suspicious warriors. Elara no longer slept in the women's quarters. She stood now at the edge of the sacred grove, the full moon a silver coin in the black velvet sky. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but she felt no chill. The pelt she wore was from the first stag she had felled with her own bow, a gift from Alaric, who had taught her. She heard him before she saw him, the soft crunch of snow under his feet. He came to stand beside her, his presence a warmth that seeped into her soul. The pack is settled, he said. Morwen has sworn her loyalty, to you as well as to me. Elara nodded. It had not been easy. The she-wolf's pride had been a formidable obstacle, but Elara's courage during the parley and her steadfast refusal to wield power cruelly had moon by moon earned a grudging respect. Alaric turned to her. In the moonlight, his eyes glowed with a soft lupine light. I have a question for you, her heart stuttered. You said you would ask after you had earned my trust. Have I? His gaze was earnest, vulnerable. She looked at him, at the alpha who now consulted her on every decision, who had taught her their ways without demanding she change her own, who looked at her as if she had hung the moon itself. The man who had spent 3 moons proving his word was stone. Yes, she whispered, you have. He went down on one knee in the snow. He took her hand, his own warm and sure, around her cold fingers. Elara, he said, his voice thick with emotion, You are my strength, my heart, my fated mate. Will you run with me? Will you be my alpha queen? Will you let me love you and protect you and stand at your side for all our days, until the mountains themselves crumble to dust?" The words hung in the frozen air, a perfect, profound silence. Elara looked down at the formidable wolfkin Alpha, kneeling in the snow for her, the man who had broken her and remade himself to be worthy of her. She felt the truth of the bond between them, a golden thread of fate that had pulled them through fire and shadow to this moment. She did not say yes. She showed him. She reached for the ties of her tunic. Her eyes locked on his. She let the heavy pelt fall to the snow, then the wool beneath, until she stood before him in the moonlight, her skin glowing in the silver radiance, utterly vulnerable, utterly powerful. "Show me," she said, her voice steady. "Show me the wolf, not as a weapon, not as a threat, as my mate." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by an awe so deep it was almost reverence. This was the final trust, the final surrender. He rose to his feet. He did not look away from her as he began to remove his own leathers and furs, his gaze a physical caress. When he stood bare before her, the hard lines of his body a testament to a life of war and power, the air began to shimmer around him. It was the shift of trust. There was no violence in it this time. No cracking bones cried out in protest. It was a flowing, beautiful, and terrible transformation. Muscle and sinew reshaped itself in a silent, awe-inspiring dance. Fur, the color of his hair, rippled over his skin. His form expanded, not with a roar, but with a deep, shuddering sigh. Where the man had stood, now stood the wolf, left ear nicked with the same crescent scar. He was immense, a creature of myth and moonlight. His fur was dark as shadow. His eyes held the same fierce, intelligent light. He was power made flesh, but it was a power held in perfect, gentle check. He padded forward, his head lowered, and nudged her hand with his massive muzzle. His warmth was incredible. Elara let out a soft sob, her fingers sinking into the thick, soft fur of his neck. She laid her cheek against his head, feeling the primal, steady beat of his heart. This was the final truth of him. The beast and the man, inseparable, and he had given it to her as his ultimate gift. She looked into his wolfish eyes and gave him her answer. "Yes," she breathed into the silence. "Yes, Alaric, I am yours, as you are mine, forever." The great wolf let out a soft chuff, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He turned and began to run, a fluid shadow through the moonlit snow, then circled back to her, an invitation in his gaze. Laughing, her heart soaring, Elara ran with him. The human and the wolf, under the ancient moon, their forms outlined in silver, their bond a tangible force in the world. They ran through the grove, through the untouched snow, toward the fortress that was their home, toward the life they would build together. It was not an ending. It was a howl of triumph that would echo through the ages.